The unraveling ice. Understanding the impact of climate change on glacier melting. 1. Introduction. Vanishing giants. Glaciers, majestic ice masses that have shaped landscapes for centuries, are facing unprecedented challenges due to climate change. The warming of the Earth's climate is causing accelerated glacier melting, with far-reaching consequences for ecosystems, sea levels, and the availability of freshwater resources. 2. The mechanism of glacier melting. Temperature's toll. Glacier melting is primarily driven by rising temperatures resulting from global warming. Warmer air temperatures cause glaciers to lose more ice through processes like melting at the glacier surface and the calving of icebergs at glacier termini. Feedback loops. As glaciers melt, they expose darker surfaces like rock or sediment. These darker surfaces absorb more sunlight, further increasing local temperatures and accelerating the melting process. A feedback loop intensifying the impact of climate change. 3. Impact on sea level rise. Contributing to coastal changes. The most immediate consequence of glacier melting is the contribution to rising sea levels. As glaciers lose mass, water from the melted ice enters the oceans, posing risks to low-lying coastal areas and islands. Global significance. While glacier melting is not the sole contributor to sea level rise, thermal expansion of seawater and the melting of ice sheets also play roles. Its impact is significant and has global repercussions. 4. Changes in hydrology. Freshwater supply. Glaciers act as natural reservoirs, storing freshwater in the form of ice. As glaciers melt, this stored water is released into rivers and lakes, contributing to freshwater supply. However, this process is not sustainable in the long term. Shifts in runoff timing. Glacier meltwater also influences the timing and volume of river runoff. Changes in the timing of peak flows can impact ecosystems and human activities dependent on consistent water availability. 5. Ecosystem disruption. Habitat loss. Glacial environments support unique ecosystems adapted to cold temperatures. Glacier retreat and melting affect these ecosystems, leading to habitat loss for species such as snow leopards, mountain goats, and various cold-adapted plants. Alpine ecosystem changes. As glaciers shrink, alpine ecosystems are altered. Changes in runoff patterns, sediment transport, and nutrient cycling can have cascading effects on plant and animal communities. 6. Threat to biodiversity. Species at risk. Species dependent on glacial environments, particularly those adapted to cold and ice-covered habitats, face heightened risks of extinction. Polar bears, for example, rely on sea ice formed from glacial meltwater for hunting. Adaptation challenges. Rapid glacier melting poses challenges for species to adapt or migrate to new habitats, especially when combined with other stressors such as habitat fragmentation and human activities. 7. Impact on weather patterns. Regional climate changes. Glacier melting can influence local and regional weather patterns. Changes in the amount of meltwater entering rivers can affect temperature, precipitation, and wind patterns, impacting weather systems downstream. Glacial lake outburst floods. The sudden release of meltwater from glacial lakes, a phenomenon known as a glacial lake outburst flood, can have severe downstream consequences, including flash floods and infrastructure damage. 8. Glacier-related hazards. Landslides and avalanches. Glacier retreat can destabilize the surrounding landscape, increasing the risk of landslides and avalanches. Meltwater can lubricate the base of glaciers, making the ice more prone to sliding. Infrastructure vulnerability. Human settlements in proximity to glaciers face increased vulnerability to these hazards. Infrastructure, such as roads and buildings, may be at risk from glacial-related events. 9. Mitigation and adaptation strategies. Global climate action. Addressing glacier melting requires global efforts to mitigate climate change. Reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and international cooperation are essential components of mitigating the impact on glaciers. Local adaptation. Communities reliant on glacial meltwater need to develop adaptive strategies. This includes sustainable water management practices, early warning systems for glacial hazards, and diversification of livelihoods. 10. Conclusion. A critical crossroads. The impact of climate change on glacier melting is emblematic of the broader environmental challenges facing the planet. Understanding and addressing these changes are not only crucial for the preservation of glaciers and their ecosystems but also for the well-being of communities that depend on the services provided by these vanishing giants. Sustainable global action is imperative to steer the trajectory away from further glacier loss and its cascading consequences.